Good evening, everybody. How is everybody doing here tonight? It is another episode of Unidentified History. This one's probably at least a week overdue, if not a little bit longer than that. I am your host, Dave Unger, coming to you here tonight to talk to you a little bit about the 2026 Conscious Life Expo. There's the magazine or the program. Not sure you can see it. Kind of fading in and out. There you go. Took place February 20th through the 23rd down in Los Angeles. And I've been meaning to do this episode to recap the event. And of course, that got delayed because of all the nonsense going on with the X account, which I'm not going to get into in this video. I did a separate standalone video that's not even part of the Attitude of Aggression line of anything. I'm explaining what happened with the X account, explaining where things are. Very unlikely I'm going to get that account back. And I hope that this would resolve itself quicker than it would. And I could kind of stream this through the X Live chat or the X Live feature as well as on YouTube. But that's not going to happen. So I've waited long enough. And, the expo is a couple weeks ago. So I want to do this recap of this event. By and large, the Conscious Life Expo, 2026 Conscious Life Expo down in LA, it was excellent. It really was surprising to me just how good of an event this really was. Um, I mean, the number of vendors and the things to see and the things you could do and buy and interact with was really stunning. I did not expect it to be as massive an event as it was. I mean, this took up 3 floors of the Los Angeles Hilton at the Hilton at the LAX. Man, there was just so much to see, so much to do, so much to experience, and really just the quality of the speakers who showed up for this thing. And I'll talk about the ones I attended. Obviously, it's not like, when I did the UAP summit a couple weeks ago. In that one, I could attend every single panel that was going on because it was all sequential. It was linear. Conscious Life Expo is very much like Contact in the Desert. In fact, I've called it Contact Light because, you had a lot of occasions where speakers you would be interested in were speaking at the same time. And you couldn't be in 2 places at once. I mean, I guess in theory, you could go from one to the other, but the cost for like a 3-day pass down there was ridiculously cheap, like $125 for 3 days. Compare and contrast to I just paid for like 1 day at Contact in the Desert, $189 for 1 day. And I'll be getting a couple more of those as we go along because I am going to go to Contact in the Desert. I would have got a longer pass, but they haven't released the schedule yet, just the speakers, which looks stacked, to be honest with you guys. But Conscious Life Expo had a lot of great speakers. I was very fortunate to get to go to, let's see, how many panels did I actually get to go to? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them. Wow. So I got to go to 10 of the panels. 9 of them were paid for. So I paid for, no, wait, was it 9? Yeah, 9 of them were paid for in addition to the $125. But it wasn't bad. I mean, every one of these workshops was like $55 with the exception of the secret technology panel, which is like an additional 20. And then the very last panel I did was a freebie. It was a free panel. So I got to do that as well. So I'm going to recap, the highlights of the panels that I went to because I think I picked a really good and strong cross section of people in the UAP community that many of us who follow this topic as passionately as we do are going to recognize the names and would be interested in all the things that they had to say. So let's get into it. So Friday, I go down there. Of course, I go down there on Friday, the 20th of February. And, this is the day after the X account has been hacked and all that shit's going on down there. But the first person I got to see was none other than Rizwan Virk. And Rizwan Virk, of course, we know him as the author of the simulation hypothesis. And what we discovered as the weekend went along is that Rizwan Virk I think he had just passed his PhD or something like that. So he's now Dr. Virk. So if you see him, make sure you call him by his appropriate and distinguished title, Dr. Virk, because that's what he is now. So a lot of what he talked about, and of course, I 1000% highly recommend you check out Rizwan's tremendous books, The Simulation Hypothesis and the follow-up, I think it's Simulation Matrix or something like that. They are phenomenal works and really will get you thinking about the world in a different light. And I'm kind of really glad that I've started to study quantum mechanics a lot more. And I've always shied away from it because it's just like, math was never, I mean, it was a strong suit of mine up until like they started adding in algebra and calculus. And then I started struggling a little bit. So I kind of shied away, and probably explains why I became a lawyer, because we don't deal with math as much as doctors and stuff like that. But um, that issue notwithstanding, I thought that the studying quantum mechanics lately, and I've been doing that through this video series I got off Amazon Prime called The Many Worlds of Quantum Mechanics. Sean Carroll is the professor for this thing, and he's explaining quantum mechanics in a way that is somewhat digestible. Like I'm retaining and understanding roughly 60-70% of what I'm watching. But it's really cool because so much of that ties into Rizwan's work and the simulation hypothesis. Concepts like quantum entanglement and things of that nature, waves, particles, how all that fits together, why certain things like quantum entanglement make more sense in a simulated universe than it would if we were in, like, say, base reality, that sort of thing. And Rizwan talked a lot about concepts and theories that tie directly into quantum mechanics. Paul Hynek had introduced Rizwan Virk. Paul was one of the ones that I wanted to see, but it conflicted with something else I had tickets for on Sunday. I'll talk about that when we get to that. But I thought, Rizwan's whole thing was an excellent, excellent lecture talking about simulation theory, the hypothesis behind it, some of the more intricacies and nuances of the whole thing. And I thought it was an excellent workshop by Rizwan. Really glad I got a chance to go there. I was so bummed though. He was like, after he was done talking up on the upper level, like the third floor of the LA Hilton, he was doing book signings for the simulation hypothesis. And I'm like, shit, I got a version of it on Kindle. Obviously, he's not going to be signing my Kindle. Thought about buying another version, but I was like, I had to think about getting to the next seminar, and I wasn't sure, well, should I just buy another copy and have him sign it? And then there was a pretty good line in front of it. And I just opted against the whole thing. So I didn't do that. But I will honestly say Rizwan's lecture, he's very well spoken, really cool guy to listen to him talk. And was just enamored with the whole thing and really pleased that that was how I got to start the whole Conscious Life Expo, by watching Rizwan Virk talk about simulation hypothesis, some quantum mechanics, some quantum physics, and just a different way of looking at it. Because I've said it before, simulation hypothesis, simulation theory, it can be a scary thing for a lot of people. It really does collide and force you to embrace some things that a lot of people aren't comfortable with, especially those who really cling to the Bible, the more religious people, the way that they think that the universe is in a certain structure, a certain way of coming together. And simulation hypothesis kind of challenges that, but at the same time, it's all tied together. It's all relative. It's all one big thing, one big concept. And so, while I get that it makes some people very nervous about what are they talking about with simulation hypothesis and that sort of thing, if you're even remotely interested in it, I would absolutely urge you to buy Rizwan's book, read Simulation Hypothesis, make up your own mind, because there is a lot of aspects of quantum mechanics that don't make a lot of sense unless there's some sort of simulation going on at some level. Quantum entanglement is the big thing, where particles separated by light years are identical. If one of them spin up in one state, that if it's 4 light years away, it's going to be spin up over there just by the fact that you observe this whole thing. So by all means, go check out Rizwan's book, and I think you'll enjoy it. I think it's very enlightening and very educational. One thing that has to be noted, that right when Conscious Life Expo was starting, this is the same day. I think it's the same day or the day after. I'm not sure. And you got to remember that when my X account got hacked and I couldn't access it, a big aspect of my way to, get the news about UFOs and UAPs and stuff had been cut off. So I had no idea about what was going on with Donald Trump. And this is right after, of course, Obama had made the announcement that aliens are real. I just haven't seen them. Then he walked that back. Then, Donald Trump on Air Force One sits there and says, Obama disclosed classified information. He really shouldn't have done that. He's like, he did? Obama disclosed what part of that was classified, Donald? Did you just accidentally confirm disclosure in a certain way? And then, of course, Donald Trump makes the now famous tweet ordering everybody. And, actually some of this stuff I've got, I had on my phone. I took a lot of screenshots of the event, and let me touch on that real quick, but let me look at Donald's tweet, which was, I don't know when this happened. I don't know. 6 hours ago, and I took this on February 20th. So I guess it was the same day. But of course, we all know what it says. Based on the tremendous interest shown, I will be directing the Secretary of War and other relevant departments and agencies to begin the process of identifying and releasing government files related to alien and extraterrestrial life, unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, and unidentified flying objects, UFOs, and any and all other information connected to these highly complex but extremely interesting and important matters. God bless America. This was the tweet that set the UFO world on fire as Conscious Life Expo is going on. And that becomes extremely relevant for the next panel I went to, because the next panel I went to was none other than Steve Bassett. Now, look, anybody who before I get to Steve, let me say this. One of the really cool things about Conscious Life Expo that I noticed, everybody's taking photos. Lots of people are like just flat out video recording these conferences. Nobody said shit to anybody. I mean, you could do whatever you want. Record the whole damn conference, the whole seminar. If you paid to get in there, they did not care. They did not care one bit. They just let you roll with this thing. And it was kind of cool. And so many people were recording wide swaths of these conferences and these seminars, and nobody said anything to them. By the end of the conference, I realized that what the organizers were doing is, like, in this back hallway, they had these big old stacks. You remember, like, the old computers with the CD-ROMs and the DVD-ROM drives, right? When we used to have those as a thing. They had these big stacks of these computers with multiple CD, DVD-ROM drives burning. They were filming these conferences and they were burning them onto discs, and they were selling the discs of the whole conference to people for like $10. I mean, ridiculously cheap. And that was one of the coolest things about Conscious Life Expo, is it wasn't like so many of these other, like, you go to Sol Foundation. Fuck, good luck, being able to release anything that you may have filmed there. Good luck even filming anything there. Some of the stuff I've heard from people who went to the Sol Foundation. And this, nobody cared. Just everybody's filming, everybody's sharing, everybody's having a good time. And yeah, it's Conscious Life, so maybe some people were very high. Very good chance of that. And that's okay. That's part of the whole consciousness aspect of things. But to get back to my point, Steve Bassett was the next workshop that I went to. And anybody who knows anything about Steve has known that this guy has been the most optimistic person out there as far as championing disclosure being imminent, coming any day now, that sort of thing. No matter what curveball he was thrown, Steve Bassett remained optimistic and on the forefront of saying the truth embargo is going to end, disclosure is coming, so forth and so on. So you can only imagine the mood in that room in the wake of this announcement by the President of the United States mere hours before Steve Bassett took the stage. And that was going to be a big talking point about this Friday, the conferences on Friday, and it actually permeated the whole weekend. Trump's announcement. There was a palpable, renewed sense of optimism. People were genuinely giddy about this whole thing in the room. And I got a picture on my phone, and if anybody wants it, just let me know. I'll send it to you. It's a picture of Steve Bassett and Alan Steinfeld just kind of embracing each other right before Steve took the stage. And I get it. I absolutely get it. And Steve's presentation was really kind of a recap of where we'd come from roughly 2017 to that moment in time. Thanking certain people, and a more somber moment right at the beginning of Steve's workshop. He mentioned Nick Pope, and he indicated at that time that Nick was on hospice. I did not know that at the time, and I don't know any updates because obviously, my connection to the world is a little bit limited at the moment. So I'm catching things here and there from other people and other things. So I don't know. But, the whole thing was, I got to listen to it, and Steve indicating that Nick was on hospice. That's a bummer to hear that sort of things. That was just kind of where we started with the whole thing and where we were going with that. So yeah, there was definitely a renewed sense of optimism that we had in that room with Steve talking about, what was going on with him. And just, it was fun stuff. Thank you. Thank you, Ray. Love you too, buddy. I'm glad I got Ray here with me talking about this. Steve was very optimistic and he went through the whole recap of everything. And it's interesting when you juxtapose Steve against Danny Sheehan's conference, which I'll talk about. That happened on Saturday. But it was it was filled with a new renewed sense of optimism. And just Steve, you could see him, you know, build up a little bit and kind of stand a little bit taller in the wake of this great announcement by the president that they were going to disclose the UFO files. Now, even Steve was obviously and rightfully so trepidatious to a point where he's basically saying, let's see what happens. We've heard stuff like this before. And Danny was going to point something out on the next day, that I'll get to that when I talk about Danny's conference. But all in all, it was great to hear Steve live, and Steve would come in a couple of other places. And it just, to me, for somebody who I know how much this means to Steve Bassett and how much he has championed this for so long, and just to see that actual feeling of giddiness in that room. And I think I messaged either on Pavel's Discord chat or maybe it was Andy's Discord chat that I took a picture and I shared it, the picture of Steve Bassett and Alan Steinfeld together. And I said, yeah, there's definitely a sense of renewed optimism here. It was, I can't help but feel, I almost wonder what was Steve's presentation going to be had Trump not made that announcement. Because I 1000% think that Steve called an audible, and he rightfully should have done that in the wake of the announcement by Trump, because how are you going to ignore that? It happens 6-8 hours before you take the stage. One of the biggest announcements in UAP history. You got to talk about it. And I thought Steve pivoted really well during this whole workshop and touched on a lot of critical aspects of things and talked about, just where we were, where he thought we were going, the UAPDA, the, renewed effort to get that done, how that was going to get done, where this was going to lead, the prospects for what sort of records. You also have to understand, though, that although this disclosure order came down, consolidate, get the records, so forth and so on, you also have to understand that we're living in a day and age where you've got the JFK files and everything we went through with that, and the Epstein files and 3.5 million documents, a lot of it heavily redacted. So everybody's basically thinking, yeah, sure, we'll get this stuff, but in what form, what fashion, and how badly will it be all carved up, cut up? So understandably, there's optimism for sure, but at the same time, people are smart enough to realize this is just the beginning salvo in all this, and there's a long way to go. Friday evening, I got to do the secret technology panel. And this was this was a cheapie. This was only $20, $20 to get in this thing. And let me read to you the lineup of who they had, because this panel was fucking phenomenal, man. We had Adam Apollo, Thomas Winterton from Skinwalker Ranch. We'll talk more about him. Rizwan Virk, Dr. Virk was here. Deep Prasad, I'm going to talk about him a little bit later on. Billy Carson was there. Linda Moulton Howe. Robert Grant, and Jimmy Church was the moderator. Linda stole the show. That's all I can say. Linda is one of those charismatic, she's 84 years old. She just celebrated her 84th birthday while this was going on. And I went to Linda's, and I'm going to talk a lot more about Linda's conference when I talk about the next day. For 84 years old, man, Linda is sharp as a fucking tack, man. She shows no mental decline at all. She is just on it. Man, she is sharp. She is well-spoken. She's always been well-researched. That has not changed at all. She got the loudest ovations, to use pro wrestling parlance. She got the biggest pop out of just about anybody who was on here. And Linda talked a whole lot about quantum tunneling and how quantum tunneling was the way in which the extraterrestrials, the unidentifieds, whatever you want to call them, interdimensionals, ETs, whatever you want to call them. This is how they are traversing these large, gigantic gulfs of time and space in, seconds. It's through a concept called quantum tunneling. Deep Prasad was sitting right next to her the whole time. Deep is sitting there looking at her, and he's smiling and he's nodding approvingly. And we're going to talk about Deep and just how brilliant he is. But he was agreeing a lot with what was going on. But the thing about the secret technology panel is, again, this is another panel that I can't help but feeling that they had to, by necessity, pivot to the Donald Trump tweet and the indication that we're going to disclose UFO files. Because the first part of this secret technology panel was discussing this tweet by Donald Trump. And, and I hate calling it tweets because one thing I've learned about through this whole situation with X, it is not Twitter anymore. People need to stop calling it X or Twitter, whichever one. It is not Twitter. Twitter actually gave a shit about their users at one point. X could care less. But I digress. That's not the point. But the big thing was that they were talking about the outset of this is what they thought Trump's post, and I guess we'll just call it a tweet because I guess that's the easiest thing to do because X doesn't have their own cute name for what these posts are other than posts. But in the wake of Donald's announcement, everybody had their moment to talk about what they thought was going to happen. Now, unlike Steve Bassett's panel, this panel I thought was much more realistic and down to earth as to the prospects of this, what it was going to mean, what it might mean for the world, that sort of thing. So it was a very tempered expectation, very low key, very measured. Nobody was going to get their hopes up too high. Everybody kept their expectations kind of low, and we're just going to deal with it and go with it from the way it was going to come to them. And like I said, Linda really kind of stole the show with her discussion on quantum tunneling, but everybody had some good stuff to give. And I absolutely love this panel. And again, I can't help but wonder what was this amazing panel planning to talk about before this curveball got thrown at them. And they found themselves talking about potential disclosure, real potential disclosure. Jimmy Church, of course, was the moderator, and Jimmy does a really good job with this stuff. And he kept everything in line. I wanted to hear a little bit more from Billy Carson. Billy was at the far end of the stage, so he got, he didn't get on there till the very end a little bit, and I wanted to hear more from him. But Jimmy did a good job about snaking it back the other direction when they were asking some more questions. Of course, Thomas Winterton talking about whatever's going on at Skinwalker Ranch. We'll have more from him in a little bit, talking about that in more detail. But I love this panel because it's such an eclectic mix. You've got Prasad at one end, who's like 30 years old or something like that. And then you've got Linda Moulton Howe, who's 84 at the other end. And then you've got everybody in between. You got Dr. Virk, you got Billy Carson, Robert Grant, who was very much talking about some deep concepts, Adam Apollo as well. It was all a fascinating discussion and trying to tie in the whole consciousness aspect of things, which makes sense at the Conscious Life Expo with whatever technology we're dealing with. How is this stuff all connected? How is it, how do you reconcile so many different facets of such seemingly non-congruent ideals and theories and that sort of thing? So I thought the secret technology panel was excellent. And I wish I'd recorded this earlier so I could remember more of the finer details about things. But, there was a lot going on and a lot of things that were being said that are very familiar to most of us. A lot of us who study this field or are passionate about this field, the UFO, UAP topic. There's a lot of things that you've all heard before and things like that. So it was an excellent panel. Obviously, I think when you've got that many people involved, right, where you've got a panel consisting of, we got how many people were on this thing? 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. And Jimmy Church, the moderator, made 8. So when you got a panel that's that big, it's awfully hard to get detailed on a lot of concepts and theories. So everybody threw in their 2 cents. And again, I do think that the whole Donald Trump announcement earlier that day kind of threw these guys for a loop because they, by necessity, had to address it. And whatever they had planned on talking about got scuttled to a certain extent, or at least got put on the back burner to a certain extent, and that sort of thing. So that was the Friday seminar. I got, like I said, really good stuff. Rizwan Virk, Steve Bassett, and the Secret Technology panel. Phenomenal stuff. The Saturday stuff was even better. And it started with the morning session with Dr. Diane Hennacy Powell. And many of us know who Dr. Powell is. And her work, obviously her involvement with the telepathy tapes is well documented. I don't know exactly what's going on with Dr. Powell and Kai Dickens and the telepathy tapes right now. I've read some things that kind of suggest maybe there was a falling out. Maybe there's some concern over the direction of the telepathy tapes, I don't really know. But, at this thing, Diane brought onto stage 2 of the autistic kids, the nonverbal autistic kids, for demonstrations. They had their parents with them. Um, and you got to do these demonstrations with the spelling boards, and to actually be there and to see these kids do their thing live and in living color was beyond powerful. Because as a father of a my son's on the spectrum. He's a highly functioning autistic. He doesn't need a whole lot of special anything. If anything, he's a little socially awkward. He doesn't like to talk to too many people. And that's common with a lot of the autistic kids. Obviously, these are different children because they're nonverbal. But the whole notion of their telepathy and the 2 kids involved here, and I don't remember their names, and I'm sorry about that, but they seem to be indicating that they had met each other on the hill. And anybody who's listened to the telepathy tapes will immediately know what I'm talking about when I say the hill. And they had met them there, and one of the kids he was a little upset with his mom because she was getting some stuff out of him, and he kind of indicated that he thought the other girl was very pretty and that sort of thing. But it's amazing to see they did demonstrations there of the way that the kids are seeing things through the eyes of their parents. Like the parents are looking at something, the kids can't possibly see it. There's no way, you do this thing and you watch it demonstrated live and you're like, yeah, that would be awfully hard for them to fake or to cheat. Was it as controlled an environment as you would have liked to have seen in a more clinical structured setting to really prove or disprove the existence of telepathy? No. It was not that controlled. So I'd say take it with a grain of salt. From the lay person just sitting there in the audience, I couldn't see any well, I'm not even really a lay person because of my training as an attorney. I'm bred to look for lies and to try and discern and distinguish when people are full of shit. Didn't see anything like that. Saw some really interesting demonstrations of stuff. Saw one of the kids, and his mom was saying that when he's like in the zone and he's vibing, like they called it vibing on a telepathic level, he would do this to his eye, right? He would do this and he's looking at his phone the whole time. And it's all coping mechanisms and ways of shutting out all the sensory stuff. But he's like, when he's talking about the girl and talking about being on the hill, he's doing this the whole time and looking at his phone. So yeah, it's pretty cool stuff to actually witness live and in color. I can't tell you how much I love being there for this first panel, listening to Diane Powell, listening to the parents. And it was awesome. It was just awesome to see kind of like a live demonstration of the telepathy tapes in action. And again, I say, was it the most structured environment that you would want to see to definitively prove anything? Of course not. You're in a conference room. There's, 50 to 100 people in this hallway, in this room. You got to take all that stuff with a grain of salt and take it all into consideration. But was it still cool to see this stuff done and to meet 2 of the kids involved with the telepathy tapes and just kind of feel that they get this rap about these nonverbal kids and just kind of like that so many of them for so long and still to this day are just relegated to an afterthought or just like there's no hope for them. And you look at these kids and you see what they're doing. That's not the case at all. You can look at them and whether you believe this shit or not, there's a lot going on with these kids. There's a lot happening behind the eyes and in the brain and just the way that they are. And when you see it happen in front of you, it really does change you. It is an experience that I know they're probably going to do this at Contact. I think Diane will be there as well. I urge anybody going to see this at Contact in the desert. Hopefully they do the same thing because it's unbelievably powerful to witness that. Who came next? Ross Coulthart. Yeah. So Ross came next and before Ross, after Diane's thing, I went into they had a bistro there, got myself some coffee and just a little something to eat. Megan Medic comes in with, not her entourage, but some of her friends. There was no entourage, guys. These guys were all very approachable. She sat right behind me eating something. I did not bother her. I leave that for Bigfoot. Sasquatch can bother Megan all she wants. Because Bigfoot Disclosure Diaries. I almost thought about going up to her and saying, are your pits really perspiration free like Squatch, like Foot said? But I refrained because I'm a respectful gentleman. despite what X thinks of me. But Ross's presentation was good. And during Ross's presentation, one of the big complaints I have about the audience, the crowd, the audience goers, the people in the audience, participants at Conscious Life Expo, one of the complaints I have reared its ugly head for the first time here. When people ask you if you have questions, have a fucking question. Don't just come up there and make a bunch of statements because you want to hear yourself talk, or you want to try and connect or convince some of these personalities like Ross Coulthart that you've had a valid experience. Or if you're looking for validation, don't go to these guys for that. Because the problem was so many people were talking about their own experiences, and Ross a few times, and Thomas Winterton would have to do it the next day. Ross was like, is there a question here? Did you have a question? So it's awkward for them to do that. One of the gals to this point, so Ross talked about his experience at, I think it's Esalen, right? I think that was a place up around the Bay Area where they had a very unique and profound experience with, I think Jordan Jozak was with them. If I'm remembering this correctly, I'm not sure if Jordan was there as well, but I think it was Jordan. And he was talking about how they were going to see like a blue hexagon on the beach. I'm not exactly sure where Esalen is up there. I know it's up in the Bay Area, but Ross was talking about how there was a group of people in like a hot tub having a very good time. Whether they were wearing clothes or not, I'm not sure. I don't think so. And I think Ross kind of suggested that. And Ross, if I'm getting that wrong, I'm sorry, but it seemed like you were suggesting that. But Ross was talking about they saw objects, they saw like blue orbs, and they saw things out there, and they got very close to them. And Ross was talking about, the same thing that Jake Barber mentioned, that there was this overwhelming feeling of love. And this one girl got offended by this, basically called Ross out for saying, I mean, in the way she described it, it was like Ross was describing a fucking orgy going on in a hot tub and these beings interacting with this over-sexualized sort of tryst, liaison, whatever the hell was going on. And Ross, to his credit, I give you kudos for this, Ross, he didn't put up with that shit. He basically called her out on this stuff and said, I never said that. I never said that there was something sexual. I felt love. And he's like, if that doesn't jive with your belief system or what you think it should be, Ross is like, I don't care. I don't care what you think. And I was like, good for you, Ross. And it was a very awkward moment between these two. Now, at the end of this whole thing, Ross tried to smooth things over, and he said, maybe I misunderstood what you were trying to say. And they seem to have patched things up. But what Ross doesn't know, and what I do know, is that out in the hallway at one of the booths, after this whole thing was done, this gal's talking to one of the exhibitors, and she's just going off on Ross about basically how fake he was. And just like, yeah, he tried to make it up to me, blah, blah, blah. I wasn't buying it. And I didn't catch all the conversation. And so don't hold me to exactly what was said. But the general gist, her demeanor, the things she was saying suggested that while she put up a front like her and Ross had smoothed things over, that was not the case, and she was not buying any of what he was selling. And that's okay. That is her right to do that. But it does tie into the whole thing. If people are going to take questions from you, have a fucking question. Don't just sit there and talk to hear yourself talk. Nobody gives a shit. If you've got a genuine experience, great. There's a time and a place to do that. But not when people like Ross Coulthart are saying, do you have any questions for me? Dude, I was tempted. I was tempted to ask him, Ross, where is the big UFO buried? But I did not do it because I didn't want to piss Ross, although he may have found it funny. And I think at the end of this whole thing, he does indicate that at one point a blue hexagon did land or was positioned near the beach. So if it was Jordan talking about this blue hexagon, it all happened. But I think the big thing I took away from Ross's workshop and his lecture was just his shifting towards really looking at the consciousness aspect of things, which makes a lot of sense, of course, because we're talking about conscious life. And Ross was very much in tune with the whole consciousness and taking a bigger interest in that. Now, whether that's the influence of Jake Barber, I don't know. But if you look at where Ross started last year, 2025, with the Jake Barber interview. And the stuff that Jake had said about the feminine presence and all that sort of thing, and how that kind of translated into where Ross went with this whole thing. I definitely think you could see his shift towards accepting more of the consciousness-based aspect of things. And I think that was kind of cool to see, and Ross kind of embracing a wider view of the world, that sort of thing. So it was a really good lecture, a really good workshop. We didn't get into a whole lot of stuff. Megan was acknowledged a little bit. She was sitting in the back and that sort of thing. But all in all, it was a very solid seminar and workshop, and very enjoyable. And it was really cool to see Ross in that environment. And it was very different. Like last year, I saw Ross and Bryce Zabel speak at Contact, a live episode of Need to Know, which turned out to be one of the last ones that they did. But nobody asked Ross anything about Lockheed. No one asked Ross a lot of things that you could have asked him. Like I said, it was too much people wanting to hear themselves talk, making a statement to Ross, and Ross reminding them, do you have a question? And that's not how it should be. And that's just my opinion on that. If you're going to come to these things and you're going to ask questions, then please, really, ask a question. You got these guys there, ask a question, because you took up the time that somebody who may have had a real question to ask could have utilized. Saturday afternoon, Danny Sheehan took the stage. And this is one place where I actually did get to ask a question. But Danny, and I told you earlier that Danny's presentation was juxtaposed against Steve. Now, Steve Bassett was in the audience for this thing. And Danny did a lot of what Steve had done and recapped kind of where we had come from. But he, of course, got into the more legal aspect of things, which appeals to me for obvious reasons. The biggest thing I took away from Danny's presentation, a couple things. One of them was he looked at the whole Trump announcement and he brought it home beautifully. And he put it in perspective beautifully, because Danny said what Trump has just ordered, people forget this, that in 2023, UAPDA, everybody thinks UAPDA failed in 2023. Yes and no. A lot of it got passed. And part of it that got passed was the exact same thing that Trump had ordered. So this has been on the books since 2023, that these organizations, these agencies were supposed to start gathering up all of this UFO, UAP files and material. They've already been ordered to do that. So when Trump goes and makes this tweet that lights the world on fire, all he did was restate what had already been ordered of these entities and these agencies. So in the words of Danny, Trump's tweet doesn't mean jack shit. And I think that's critically important for people to understand. If you are waiting for the deluge of UFO files to come plopping into your lap as unclassified, declassified, here's the good shit, it's not going to happen, guys. It's just not going to happen. They've had years now. Now, will this expedite? Will President Trump sit there and say, hey, you guys were told to do this like 3 fucking years ago. What's the holdup? Get it in gear. Now, maybe you get that. Maybe it accelerates things. Maybe it gets people to get off their ass and get going on this thing. But the notion that Trump ordered something that wasn't already in existence is false. Flat out false. And Danny Sheehan made a good point, and he's right, because there was a lot in the 2023 UAPDA that talked about organizing records, gathering records, the process of beginning to declassify records. All that stuff was in there. People forget that because they just assumed that it all failed. It didn't all fail. A lot of it passed. The other big thing is they are working on new legislation and new UAPDA. There was stuff that Danny had talked about, that he had a big bill, like a 58-page bill that was all marked up and all this sort of stuff. And he was talking about the prospects for where he thinks things are going to go. And of course, part of that is enhanced and increased whistleblower protection. And we need that. Absolutely need enhanced whistleblower protection. Guys like David Grush, Matthew Brown, Dylan Borland, Jeff Nusatelli, people like that need additional protection so they're not just out there with, holding their dicks in the wind, guys, and hoping for the best. That's not what these guys need. They need true protection. They need a true manner by which they can seek recourse, seek redress, get, if they've been retaliated against, some way to address that. get these guys a job, get them some level of employment, get their fucking clearances back. Whatever the case is, we need better whistleblower protection, because what's happened to guys like Matthew, like Dylan, especially those two who both lost their jobs. Grush, yes, to a lesser extent, but that's only because Eric Burleson hired him on his staff. Otherwise, Dave would be shit out of luck too. So we need that. But the bigger thing is that the question I asked Danny was, I said, this document you have that's all marked up, I said, is there anything in there addressing or seeking to overturn Navy versus Egan? And I've talked about this case before, because this is the case that seems to have instilled in the executive branch this belief that they are the absolute in charge as far as national security clearance and classification. And we've talked about that previously, I think on the last time we were on Unidentified History with the thoughts about the James Fox event. And Kirk McConnell had talked about it. The idea that that is not the case, that the executive branch does not hold all that, that this Navy versus Egan has been interpreted in a way that, and I'll tell you, what Danny had said to me when I asked the question, so I'll circle back, is he said, not only does this address this, his exact words, this disembowels that case. That's pretty powerful language from Danny Sheehan right there, that what they had there was going to disembowel Navy versus Egan. Not just overturn it, but basically eviscerate the damn thing. And he was talking about how Navy versus Egan, there's a lot of stuff that in there that's dicta, that the executive branch latched onto a Now, dicta is something for the non-legal people out there. Dicta is a part of a case that is not really part of the holding. So it's not the aspect of the case that determines the outcome. It's almost, in a lot of ways, it's the justice is speaking hypothetically. Hey, this really didn't come up in this case, but if it did, here's what we're thinking we would do on this thing. So a lot of times dicta is hypothetical. It's not part of the official holding, but it does give you a pretty good indication as to the direction that a court would go in were it presented with a specific set of facts and circumstances and law. And Danny had indicated that the executive branch took the dicta from Navy versus Egan and ran with it for all these years. And Joe Spielberger at the hearing back in September was the first one who clued me in to the existence of this case and how you've got to get around that. You've either got to get the Supreme Court to vacate their prior decision or overturn their prior decision. And that stuff happens. That stuff happens from time to time. But Danny's doing it the better way, which is approaching it legislatively and gut it that way. Get the legislature to say, nope, that's not what we meant. This is what we meant. That's an incorrect interpretation of that case. So that's certainly encouraging. So I thought Danny's lecture and workshop was really good. I thought it was a little bit more grounded than Steve's was. Certainly not nearly as optimistic. People had a day to think about these things. And Steve's sitting there at the right time, and he didn't speak up and kind of say, oh, no, I disagree. So I think, a day later he realized that, hey, there's some truth that Danny is spouting here. So that was an excellent seminar and workshop. But the main event Saturday night was Linda Moulton Howe. And I got to refer to my phone for this, because I tell you, man, Linda came out firing, and she talked a lot about, and I mean, I took a shit ton of pictures of slides and stuff like that. But Linda, like I said, 84 years old, hasn't lost a beat. I mean, she's talking all about some, she didn't talk so much about quantum tunneling on this one, but she did talk about a lot about the EBENs, extraterrestrial biological entities. And she had a picture of a gray being that I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you guys can see. Yeah, probably not. So anyway, there's a picture of a gray being, but she had so much stuff here that I'm just going to talk a little bit about this stuff. Like, they're talking about the EBENs in their own solar systems, talking about the universe, talking about Mars did support life at one time. I don't remember exactly where all these documents came from, but there was some cool stuff, and going through some of these pictures that I took of these slides she have, everything the aliens, here's an interesting one, everything the aliens do on Earth is sanctioned, either formally or informally, by our government. So, if you speculated about, are there agreements? According to this, there is. However, we have not authorized the aliens to harm or kill humans. To the best of this alien's knowledge, the aliens have not purposely killed or harmed any human being. Now, that's debatable, right? Crop circles are, of course, a form of communication, but to understand them, you first must be totally briefed into the whole program. Obviously, very few people are. She talked about animal mutilations that are occurring and performed by the aliens. They wanted to conduct experiments, better animals than humans. I don't know what that means. Now, they were suggesting that it was a joke, that sort of thing. And then this is a weird one. The items found, this is what the Eben had told this person. I don't know if it was Linda or somebody else. The items found in Thailand had been here since the middle 1980s. What's that? And I don't even think Linda knew what that was. Stuff like that. Really interesting things. Talked about the biology of the aliens. They have joints like ours. Their blood is green and chlorophyll based, not chloroform. Chlorophyll is the stuff that the plants use for respiration, photosynthesis, things like that. They have white blood cells. Their genitals are similar to ours. They copulate, but without emotion. What fun is that? Skin, blue-gray, varying in shade from light to dark. Their face is flat. Humans are peace-loving, unemotional, and don't understand the need for war. They were very disappointed in the Vietnam War, that sort of thing. I can only imagine what they're thinking about what's going on in the world right now. Holy shit. They've got technology advancement since 1949. They've shared a lot of scientific, cultural, and historical material that's now sustained in 18 volumes, buried somewhere in MJ-12 in the Pentagon. So there's Majestic, and a tie-in with the Pentagon. Could be DIA, could be CIA. I'm not reading everything on here. Why do the tall ones need humanoids if they have the little 3-foot robots and other robots to do their work? So there's a suggestion that a lot of us has speculated for a while that the Greys are not biological, but a form of maybe synthetic AI. That sort of thing. Let's see what else we've got. All sorts of stuff in here that I took pictures of. Einstein himself was supposed to have conversed with the Ebens about space-time physics. A lot of people speculate Einstein was one of them. Maybe not, but he maybe talked to them about this stuff. Man. Yeah, just let's see what else. There's more. How many of these slides did I take? Holy shit. They eat mostly vegetables and some fruits. Can't digest meat or most fats. Interesting. They can breathe our air. He said the gas composition of our planet and theirs is not too different. At first, they would breathe from a tank that kind of simulated his planet's atmosphere about every hour. But after a while, they kind of adjusted and, evolved to our environment. Here's a big one. Are the Ebens our forefathers, our forebearers? And this extraterrestrial said they were. So there you go. Another reason to think that we came from an alien civilization, alien technology, according to this alien and Linda's research and however she got this stuff, they are. Looking through here, what else we got? The Ebens first came here 15,000 years ago, then 5,000, then 2,000. So they've come here in cycles. They programmed a human to teach us not to fight, to love each other. Was that Christ? And this is a big one because we've heard this in multiple places that Christ was one of them. Like if you go back and listen to the interview I did with Samuel Chong, and Sam was down at Conscious Life Expo as well. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to speak to Sam too much. I said hi to him. He was very busy with Danny and all those guys. And I know Danny, he's interned for Danny before. So he was tied up with that. But Sam was there for a while. But when I interviewed Samuel Chong and we talked about the Theoba prophecy, one of the things we discussed was how speculation that Christ was one of the Theobans, that they'd taken a lot of their knowledge and stuff and put it into human form so he could perform. But at the same time, at some point he left and went to the desert, and then one of the Theobans took his place, and that's how they created all these miracles. This ties into that, indicating that Christ may have been an alien. So here's another theory about that has nothing to do with Theoba, but again, saying that Christ may have been one of them. On June 18th, 1952, this Eben died of a mysterious cause. That day, he was traveling with the colonel between Air Force bases for meetings with scientists, and officials. When he got on the first plane en route, he told the colonel he did not feel well, but attributed it to the food he had eaten. They went to the meeting and returned to Kirtland Air Force Base. Okay, and we all know where that is. He was getting much worse and was taken to a hospital where everyone tried to save his life. His temperature changed. There was even consideration given to trying to contact his home planet to summon help if possible to fix him. The colonel asked the doctors if he was well enough for him to run an errand. The doctors thought so. When the colonel returned to the hospital, they even told him he was going to die and he was dead within 15 minutes. The colonel hugged him before he was gone. So, kind of a sad, the dogs are upset. And see, that story upset them, but kind of a sad turn of events at the end of this whole thing with this extraterrestrial being who imparted a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge to, I don't know if it's to Linda or to somebody else, but it's fascinating just to listen to her talk about this secret document. I think if I remember, these are like the MJ-12 documents or something related to Majestic 12. But yeah, it was a fascinating conversation. And like I said, Linda is just so sharp and so on the ball and just able to really articulate these things. And she believes it with all of her heart. And I know Linda gets a lot of shit from a lot of people because of the whole Rick Doty nonsense. But nobody, you can count on one hand the number of researchers who have done as much quality work and put in the effort and the dedication as Linda Moulton Howe. And she is absolutely beloved by everybody who was down there, myself included. So I'm thrilled I got to see her speak and got to experience, 90 minutes with her talking about some of this really cool stuff. And that kind of brought Saturday to an end. Sunday was a lighter day. I mean, Saturday was pretty loaded. Sunday was a lighter day. I went back down. I actually came home Saturday night and went back down to LA for Sunday's festivities. Deep Prasad was the first one I saw Sunday. And Deep is somebody who I've got such a tremendous amount of respect for because he's so young and so smart. And this was actually, he had indicated this was the first speaking gig that he'd done, his first seminar that he'd hosted. And I thought he did a tremendous job. And there's so much about what Deep is talking about that ties into all that quantum mechanics and that quantum physics and all that sort of stuff that I talked about earlier. I think like the big thing, he's talking about Runiversic Resurgence and the theories and the key points. And I did take a lot of shots of this as well. Consciousness equals matter equals energy. So there was all this similarity about that. But all three are not separate substances, different modes of the same supergeometric object. This object is not confined to a single space-time manifold, but lives in a versatile supergeometric object, the meta-manifold, which I'll talk about in a minute. Geometry is not just the backdrop, it is the substance and dynamic behavior of reality. Key points: consciousness embeds itself in the space-time manifold and acts as a bidirectional functor. In other words, consciousness is a geometric object embedding itself into another geometric object. Getting pretty deep. A natural functional mapping inside category-like structures of geometry itself. Remember, geometry is an axiomatically consistent human invention, but we must consider reality as a whole. It's not readily captured by such axiomatic consistency. So this is a theory that Deep has been working on called Runiversic Resurgence. And that's kind of like the overview and the key thing based on cohomology, which is a mathematical tool used to study the shape and structure of spaces. Okay. And I'll skip through because some of it's so deep, no pun intended, that sort of thing that you can get really lost in this stuff. But, meta time, the Big Bang and the meta tensor, the Big Bang is not the origin of time, but a local hermitinization event in infinite dimensional metatime. Define a spacetime metatensor, a tensor of tensors acting on entire spacetimes. Time has infinite dimensions. So, I mean, stuff like that. Now, with Deep's thing, this is one where I didn't mind because some of the got people in his attendance for his lecture were clearly of the smarter persuasion. And they were adding things to the conversation. And that was a little bit different than the people who didn't really have questions. They were adding some elements to the conversation that seemed to enhance what was going on. and that was okay. But this was the big thing I took away, the space-time manifold. And the space-time manifold is this interesting looking object that's almost like, I don't know, it's like stars. It looks like a star with all these different points on it. And the different points on the star all kind of represent different universes. So he's talking about the space-time manifold reimagined. And he talked about it this way: our universe one, the speed of light is 3 times 10 to the, 18th milliseconds. Planck's constant, math and physics remain objective and consistent. So that in universe one, which is like, say, on the far left side of this manifold, that's what's the physics of universe one. Then universe two, which you'd say, okay, if universe one, our universe is on the far left side of the manifold, let's go to the opposite side, the right side. Universe two, here, the speed of light is 4 times 10 to the 18th. Planck's constant is slightly different. Math and physics remain objective and consistent. So there's only a slight variation between universe two and ours, but enough to make a discernible difference. In universe three, the speed of light is the same as it is in universe two. Planck's constant, however, is very different. Math and physics remain somewhat objective and somewhat consistent. So Planck's constant, of course, one of the concepts of physics and that sort of thing that determines a lot of things. So in this universe, that's very different, which is going to, by its very nature, although the speed of light is the same as in universe two, Planck's constant being very different is going to result in different physics and different quantums and that sort of thing. And then you go to universe four, where the speed of light is like 0. I'm not sure what that means. Planck's constant, non-existent. Math and physics become purely subjective and inconsistent. So you can only imagine how vastly different universe four would be from ours, even though on the manifold, they wouldn't seem to be separated by that much. Like in the manifold, ours is on the far left, and universe four would be on the south pole of this star-shaped, multi-dimensional object floating out there. It's fascinating to think about the whole multiversal aspect of things and how that could fit into this whole thing. But a lot of what Deep discussed really got very deep into stuff like that. It's just so key ingredients for consciousness existing versus proposed. Key takeaway from Deep's presentation: Runiversic Resurgence theory does not claim to define consciousness metaphysically. It proposes measurable structural signatures that correlate with systems capable of recursive boundary, preserving self-modeling across. Empirical tests involve integration metrics, occurrence metrics, perturbation response, and self-model updating. So if you understood all that, you understood more than I did, but I'm sure Deep could explain it to you if you get a hold of him. The big next steps: Runiversic Resurgence theory is still young. Experiments at the edge from muon G2 neutrino oscillations, where tiny deviations might hint at the metamanifold. Cosmological puzzles, how dark energy and the Hubble tension could be reframed as law fading effects. The phenomenon, what UAPs, psi research, and extraordinary human experiences might look like when treated as structural echoes instead of tabloid curiosities. There, that's good. Toy models of real physics define Hamiltonians and explore the mathematics of Dirac fluids, strange metals, and other models from a resurgence perspective, as well as define more physics, equations, and predictions. Practical consequences: if consciousness couples to curvature, can we design experiments or even technologies that measure or harness it? Lots of stuff to consider and think about there. So, yeah, hold on a sec here. Get talking too much and dry out. But Deep's presentation was awesome. Definite brain burner. There's no doubt about that. It's a definite brain burner of a workshop to attend. But I know there's a lot of people out there who would absolutely love this stuff, like Matthew Brown. I know he's somebody who would probably get into this stuff with his style of writing and how deeply he gets into certain things. I think UAP Gerb, Jesse Michaels, Rob Jones, all those guys who love this sort of stuff would really have appreciated what Deep was talking about here. Other people as well, some very smart dudes out there would have loved Deep's presentation. The afternoon then shifted to Thomas Winterton. And of course, we know Thomas Winterton from Skinwalker Ranch, one of the main characters in The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. Thomas, he talked for a little while and then he really opened things up to questions. But again, this is where people abuse the situation. And this resulted in me not being able to ask the question I really wanted to ask because other fuckers got to ask their questions or disguised them as questions. But it really wasn't a question. Again, it was a statement and they wanted Thomas to, yeah, I don't know, assimilate with them on some aspect. And even Thomas had to say, is there a question here? The big things I took away from Thomas talking about his history at Skinwalker Ranch and, just talking about the off season a little bit. And what I really wanted to ask him, and I didn't get a chance to do it, is the phenomenon as active in the off season as it is when the cameras are rolling? And this, of course, goes back to quantum mechanics a little bit and the whole observation problem, that, a particle or a wave can switch to a particle once it's observed. But up until that point, it's Schrodinger's cat, right? Is the cat in the box? Is it alive? Is it dead? Is it somewhere in between? You don't know until you actually look at it. Is the phenomenon like that? Is it as active in the off season when the cameras aren't rolling, or is it more performative? Is there a performative aspect to the phenomenon where it's out there doing things when it knows people are watching, when it knows the cameras are rolling? That'd be a problem if a extra dimensional or extraterrestrial entity actually gave two fucks about how it looked on camera or how cool it looked. That'd be disturbing and obviously a major problem. I didn't get a chance to ask him that, but Thomas talked about the seasons that they've had and all the stuff he's learned and the people he's been involved with and just the progression of things out at the ranch through 6 seasons. One of the big questions that got asked of him was why they basically don't just blow up the mesa and get to the bottom of what's down there. And, I heard that, and Thomas's explanation, of course, made a lot of sense. It's like, killing an ant with a sledgehammer sort of situation. But it's different than that because we don't know what is in the mesa. Something is there. We don't know if it's an alien craft, if it's just tunnels, if it's just something natural, some different sort of structure of the mesa that chews out these metal, things that are composed of the sort of material that goes on a space shuttle and that sort of thing. But whatever it is, if you go there and just blow the mesa up to get to this thing, you're going to destroy the technology with it, highly likely. And you just don't do that. You don't destroy something until you know what you're dealing with. It's like that scene in Dumb and Dumber. You don't kill people you don't know. You just don't do it, sort of thing. Here is like, why would we blow up the mesa and ruin and destroy any hope of checking out this technology? You could endanger that. It could be worth billions, trillions. It could be worth even more than that for humanity and the way it can advance humanity. So that, of course, all makes sense to me. Somebody did ask, and I know I'd mentioned this when I was on X. I'd mentioned this. I think I'd sent it in a tweet to Thomas Winterton and Brandon Fugel, asking about the technology that's been used over in the Giza pyramids, right? The Khafre pyramid and the Khafre scans and all that sort of stuff. And I've often wondered as well, they've gotten a lot of great results with LiDAR and Lunason and that sort of thing, right? And, they've been able to map this thing. It looks like these tunnels under the mesa, so forth and so on. But if the stuff that they're using in Egypt is real and it's reliable and it can peer into 2 kilometers under the Giza plain and see coiled structures extending, down into the ground, into the earth, why couldn't it scan the mesa and give them a better idea of what's down there? So somebody asked Thomas Winterton this exact question. Had they thought about reaching out to the guys from Egypt about this? Thomas's response was, quote, "Stay tuned," end quote. So there you go. That tells me that season 7 of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch is going to have something on there involving the Egyptian pyramid scanning technology. And I'm going to be as curious as anybody to see if they come up with anything. Now, if they could scan underneath the Giza plains in Egypt and see down there, but they can't penetrate the mesa, that's going to be an interesting finding and raises some questions as to why. Why is that? What's going on? Thomas also talked about the hitchhiker effect quite a bit. This stuff has followed him home, and it does some weird sort of stuff where, things will be going on and the kids will be panicking and they'll be calling their dad, come home, do this, do that. And then by the time he gets there, everything's calmed down. So the hitchhiker effect is pretty real, but I thought Thomas was his he was just so down to earth and laid back and just kind of a guy you could just sit there and talk to. And I thought his presentation was awesome. And just kind of getting a sneak peek behind the scenes there at Skinwalker Ranch. And Thomas talked about how his whole situation started. He was like managing a hotel there in a fuck. I can't remember the name there of the town that's right next to the Skinwalker Ranch. Is it Roosevelt? I don't remember, but he was operating a hotel there. And this is before Brandon Fugel had come out as the owner of Skinwalker Ranch. And they had asked him to come to the ranch to give them some advice on renovations and things like that after Bigelow had left. And he went out there and did that. And then the next thing you know, from there, it's all history, you know, from there it's history. And that's how he ended up at Skinwalker Ranch. But it's a fascinating story. And Thomas is a really well-spoken guy, and it was very interesting. An excellent, excellent workshop. Really glad I got to see that. I had to give up seeing Paul Hynek because I'd already got Thomas's tickets to see Thomas before I realized Paul's speaking. Not that it would have changed. I love Paul Hynek, absolutely do. But I just saw him speak at the UAP Summit, and I really wanted to see what Thomas had to say. So love you, Paul, but I still would have gone with Thomas. Just but it is not. Look, all kidding aside, that has nothing to do with Paul. I'm just such a huge fan of the show, Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. Love that show. So getting to see behind the scenes one of the main guys out there, I couldn't pass that up. Like if Brandon was there, I would have gone to see him. The last thing I did at Conscious Life was the only free workshop I went to. And it was the Hurtaks, JJ and Desiree Hurtak with Alan Steinfeld. And this was all about remote viewing. And what can I say about this one? It was fun. It really was. JJ Hurtak he's a bit of a loose cannon. I'll say that for JJ, that he talks and the three of them together have really good chemistry. And I don't know how they do it because you could tell that they didn't plan this whole thing out. Who's going to say what when? They just kind of went with stream of consciousness. And Alan would jump in for a little while. Desiree would jump in for a little while. JJ would jump in and it kind of seemingly came out of nowhere. Like, wait, where are we going with this thing? And you know, even at the end when they were trying to get people to leave, JJ was just ignoring the people who were telling him, we got to go, we got to switch the room over for the next people, all that sort of stuff. But all that stuff notwithstanding, they did a lot of remote viewing exercises, and I'd never not really tried it that often. But it's interesting to go through the kind of the process. And for me, if I'm actually trying to visualize something, I don't see anything. But like they did this one thing, they had a video, and somebody had taken like a metal ball and hidden it, and there was like a row of 12 little canisters. So somebody took this metal ball, they hid it in one of the canisters. When they rolled the video, I zeroed in on one of the canisters. Just immediately, boom, that one. And it turned out, and at the end of the video, that's where the ball was, which blew my fucking mind. I was like, whoa, okay. They had like 4 other experiments they did, and on all of those, I tried to visualize what I was seeing, and that didn't work for anything. Then they had like something where they gave some options as to whether the next picture we're going to see was a person, a cartoon, or like a place. And like the word cartoon jumped into my mind immediately. And that's what it was. So it's a fascinating experiment. You learn a lot. It was a very practical workshop where they talked about various concepts of remote viewing and things like that for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then the rest of it was like hands-on, kind of like actually engaging in remote viewing exercises. So it was pretty cool. I enjoyed it. And that was the end of Conscious Life Expo. So overall, really an awesome event. I'm blown away by the quality of the speakers, the quality of the event. On Saturday, there was a problem with on the second floor where the ballrooms are, like the California Ballroom, the La Jolla Ballroom, Laguna. Everything is funneled down this one hallway, and everybody was just crammed in there, and they weren't organizing it well as to which line went where. And so everybody in this one hallway, and you can't move. And to me, it was like being back at WrestleMania in Las Vegas last year on that walkway going across the strip where you just crammed together. Nobody can move. You can barely breathe. That was a big problem. They got that better Sunday. They actually had signs out there, and it was much more organized on Sunday and not a big problem. You know, could they be in a bigger venue? Probably. They had enough people for that, but like I said, man, I was just genuinely blown away by the quality of the speakers, by the quality of the expo. This was contact light, but not light by that much. And it was a really, really awesome event. Fully plan on going back to Conscious Life Expo next year, where I expect the 2027 Expo will be wild, and I expect them to have just as many great speakers next year as this year. So that kind of does it for the Conscious Life Expo recap for 2026. It was a good event, a great event, and I'm glad, really, really glad I got a chance to go. Very affordable. If you're in the LA area, by all means, go next year. But that's going to kind of do it for this. I mean, beyond that, obviously, lots of news going on. We talked about the Donald Trump announcement. That's dominating the headlines. Of course, the war in Iran and whatever's going on there is notable, and it should be at the forefront. But there's so much happening on the UAP side of things. We've got the colonel, I think the colonel missing in New Mexico, McCaslin, which is, yeah, you got to wonder about what's going on there. Somebody with that much knowledge about UAPs and that sort of thing. But yeah, there's a lot of news happening on the UAP side of the fence, and, things involving NASA, things involving Aero. Aero had some workshop last year, which I've read some stuff about that. And my opinion on that is like, Aero, these guys act like they've never read a New Fork report, and UFORC, however you pronounce it. I don't know who attended this workshop. I'm not sure it really matters, but a lot of people are starting to wonder, where are the files that we're supposed to have declassified, that sort of thing. There's been nothing further going on that sort of thing. So yeah, lots of information, lots of stuff happening. By all means, I tell people, go check out Psychoactivo, Pavel Ibarra's show. I think he's the best that there is going right now as far as news feeds and that sort of thing, and just keeping you in the loop with what's happening. Love Pavel's show. And especially with my situation being what it is and not being able to access the news as readily as I used to be able to, that's kind of the thing. So, hey, Mike, good to see you, man. About to finish up this show. Hopefully catch a replay. It was a good one, because talking about Conscious Life Expo, excellent event. Hey, but for Mike, since you're on here, I got this thing came. If I turn it up, it's probably going to go off, but I'll just show. So remember at the UAP summit, that UAP detector that everybody got excited about. Well, there you go. I got mine. Came yesterday, and my brilliant dumbass at midnight turns this thing on, powers this thing up, and this thing starts beeping, and my wife's like, what the fuck is that? It's weird, man. Within like 10 minutes of this thing powering up, it comes up with a magnetic anomaly and a gravitational anomaly. The magnetic one is probably okay. There's probably a magnet somewhere in the office. I just don't know. Is that what I can explain away? The gravity anomaly, I'm not sure what that was. And I got to look into that, because as soon as it's cool, Mike, because it's very small, and it looks like, like a smoke detector almost, sort of thing. That's how big, but yeah, it went off, and I don't know what the gravity anomaly was, but I immediately went outside, took this thing outside and started looking up at the sky. I didn't see anything. So I think it probably needs some fine tuning, but, yeah, between that, I got this EMF, electromagnetic frequency detector as well. So I told my wife, is like, Rufus on Amazon, their AI was saying, well, you've got technology there that for a few $100 is probably the equivalent of $1,000 in other places. And there is some good tech. That UAP detector's got some really good tech under the hood. And I know, Mike, you attended UAP summits, you know what I'm talking about. And yeah, I'll let you guys know. I told Science Bob McGuire over on Blue Sky, which is where I'm lurking now a lot more often for obvious reasons, that I'd let them know. Yeah, I don't know what that alert was last night, but I'm gonna have to figure that one out, because that was kind of interesting. But yeah, that's yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Got to pull it off the table before I'm out of bed, at least. I do need to worry about gravity. Yeah, at my age, falling out of bed wouldn't be a good idea, Mike. You're right. So I need to be careful about that. That could be falls take out a lot of people in my, well, not older than me, obviously, but that sort of thing. Yeah, keep your eyes open, and lots of news and lots of things happening on the UAP side of the fence. And Tim Phillips has been in the news lately doing stuff, talking to Christopher Sharp. doing all, I don't know if that interview's come out yet, but yeah, there's no shortage of activity going on the UAP side of things. That's going to do it for this episode of Unidentified History. Hope you guys enjoyed the recap of Conscious Life Expo. Really good event. I will, as I mentioned, will be going to Contact in the Desert. I've got 1 day booked. I'm going to get tickets for at least 1 or 2 more days to go to Contact as well. I really wish that they would have released the schedule. That'd be helpful, guys, so we could kind of plan this a little bit better. But I hear a lot of people are going to Contact this year. I know Pavel's going over there, watching Gerb's latest video, him, Rob, I think Curtis is going over there. So lots of people are heading over to the desert this year. So hopefully we can all get together and shoot the shit and have a few drinks and have some fun. And maybe by then I'll figure out how this UAP detector works for the sky watching, because I did get an interesting video last year that I'm not really sure what it is, but we'll see. That's the one that my wife's looking at me right now like, huh? It's like, yeah, I've shown you the one that only showed up in night vision. So she's nodding. But anyway, that's going to do it for this episode of Unidentified History. If you want to check me out on social media, obviously you can't go to X anymore. You guys all know about that. But you can go to Blue Sky, and it's the same. It's at Attitude Ag and whatever suffix Blue Sky uses to distinguish itself from whatever it is. But I am over there on Blue Sky. Let's be honest, not a lot of people are over there that's just the way it is. But I am over there. But obviously, the YouTube channel is where I'm going to be more active. Doing Unidentified History. Game Gone Wrong is on hiatus now because we finished that. But I think we're looking at bringing the Big Five project back this week on the pro wrestling side of things, just in time for WrestleMania season. But yeah, the Attitude of Aggression's YouTube channel is the place to be. And of course, the website, attitudeofaggression.com. Basically, everything is funneling through there. They just renewed the site today, so I don't have to worry about that. If anything changes on the X front, I'll let you guys know. And if you guys really want to have fun, go tag at X Support and hashtag reinstate at Attitude Ag. Let's see if we can get a grassroots campaign going. I don't think they'll care. But that's going to do it for this episode of Unidentified History. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be back soon. At this point, given the situation, it's time to do the Kenneth Arnold sighting. Whether anybody joins us for that or not, don't know anymore, but I think it's time to get to that because that's been put off long enough. So that's going to do it for this week or this episode. We'll be back in touch soon with more Unidentified History. You guys stay diligent, stay vigilant, stay observant. There's all sorts of stuff out there. My detector's telling me that something's in the house. So we'll see what happens. That's going to do it for this time around. You guys take care of yourself.